We're going to talk about why you should separate ideas and the execution of them coming up. What's going on, guys? My name is Tim Rustwick, and today we're going to talk about something that is really awesome when it comes to creativity, when it comes to generating ideas, and it comes to getting shit done. Because before I knew this seriously used to hold me back in so many different ways. It used to stop me from being creative. It used to limit my idea generation. It used to make people hate me in a lot of different ways too. And it really made me all around an annoying asshole. And that's basically the fact that when I first started in freelance, I had this concept of ideas and execution are the same thing. So I would work with clients and they'd be like, hey, well, what if we tried this on our website? Or what if we built this in our app? Or what if we did this in our software? And my brain would immediately go to the execution of it, right? Like, oh shit, that's more work. Like, oh fuck, this guy's 10-second idea is fucking 10 hours of work, and shit, man, I would shoot down the idea, right? Because it'd be a lot of execution. It's a lot of work. And when I would come up with ideas, this really transferred over to like every part of my life, and it was like a big part. I guess is one of those things about being a lazy programmer, right? Like it was, I didn't want to do some of the work, so there's so many things that I left out because I was a lazy motherfucker and I didn't want to do the work. So, for example, in my game, I would come up with a really cool feature and I'd be like, oh, that's going to take a long time, so no, I don't want to do that, whatever. What I realized that was happening over a long period of time was my brain had interlinked this whole concept of ideas and execution. So my creativity to generate ideas was linked to the execution of them. And because of that, my brain would constantly shut down every idea my brain came up with. And it really limited my creativity. And it really made clients think I'm an asshole because I would always shoot down their ideas. And it really made a lot of people hate me because I was that annoying asshole that would just be like, no, that idea is dumb. That idea is dumb. Or the guy that didn't agree with anybody just because he was lazy and didn't want to build the shit. So when I realized that I was compromised in this way, when I realized like, holy shit, this might actually be affecting not only my ability as a creator, but my relationships with people, I was like, shit, I got to do something about this. So I started researching creativity. I started researching like, public relations and how to like interact with people. And being an introvert and growing up without a lot of social experience, I wasn't always the great with people. So this kind of ability that I've grown over the years to kind of interact with people came a lot from the marketing company, but also a lot of conscious effort to kind of get social experience and interact with the outside world. And I realized that separating the idea from the execution has so many different benefits. But let's start with the most obvious one, right? When you're generating ideas, people, especially in a group of people, right? Like, people need to feel comfortable. People need to understand that you are not going to just shit on their idea the second it comes out of their mouth. So in any group setting, especially, you have to separate execution from the idea and separate the dicks out of the room too. All the assholes need to leave right away. But that's a whole nother video. That's a whole nother topic. But you got to know that in the creative mode, your goal should not to create the perfect solution, to create the ultimate idea. Your goal should just be to generate as many ideas as possible, as many things as you can possibly think of in that list. You can worry about the execution later because creative minds shut down when there are barriers or there are limits or people stop them in the process. And like, I think this is particularly effective in teams, but also when you're working on your own, this is just as important because ideas can get shut down very quickly when you're thinking about execution, when you're thinking about how hard it would be to do or whatever. Like, if someone came up with the idea for the iPod before there was ever an MP3 player and they worried about the execution immediately, like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we had this big square in our pocket that played all these songs randomly, that we could just connect to a computer and it would automatically play all our songs. But then they would think about how to do it. They'd be like, shit, fuck, that's a big, like, how, and they would just be like, oh, that's not worth the idea. But if you start with like all of the ideas that you can generate, right? And then you pick one that really you think would make the best impact for the user or for the player or whatever it is, like on their end, and you figure out how to do it later, it's a lot more effective. So I think you should separate it out into sessions. This is what I do personally when I'm being creative, when I'm creating things. And a perfect example would be the YouTube videos that I'm making. When I make these videos, I separate the ideas from the execution. I have a massive list of video titles that I sat down and I generated one day. I took a couple hours to generate hundreds of video titles. I have hundreds in a list of different video titles. And I found that by sitting down and doing all of those at the same time, not only was I way more creative, I got more shit done. My brain got in the mode, in the zone after a little while. It started just generating crazy ideas, just kept going. And I came up with stuff that otherwise I wouldn't have came up with because I was not constrained by the things that I had to worry about doing, or the research that I might have had to do, or the personal stories that I would have to tell, or whatever it is for the pertaining topic. And then on the flip side, when I get to the execution side, I sit down to make a video. I just pick a title and I go. I just sit in front of the camera and I pick a title and I go for it. And that is drastically different than how I used to do things, because what I would do before is I'd be like, holy shit, I need to make a video. What do I do? What do I make a video on? Oh shit, what do I do? And then it would just like, it would be a fight to come up with an idea, and then I come up with an idea and it wouldn't feel right. And then you have to like worry about what do you do and all that stuff. It's just, I found an extreme benefit to separating ideas from execution. And in game development, I think this is especially prevalent because there are so many different ideas that you can implement on so many different levels. And the execution in a game can get very tricky, especially for programmers. We're logic people. We like to think about the execution. We like to think about how we're going to build things. And being creative is not the time for that. When you're in idea generation mode, it's not the time for thinking about execution. You need to generate as many ideas as you can, because that's how you're creative. But then I think there's also another benefit on the backside of the execution, because when you get to the execution, and it's not something simple like a YouTube video where I just sit down and talk. It's something like a video game, right? And let's say you came up with an idea for a really cool mechanic. Now it's up to you to figure out how to make that work. So you don't approach this as whether or not it can work. You figure out, okay, how can I do this thing? What are the different creative ways that I can execute on this idea? And you can list those too. And I think you get in the mode with that as well, and you can come up with solutions that you never knew was possible on the execution side, because your brain is engulfed in the execution. It's engulfed in doing a thing and making the thing happen versus coming up with what you should have happen. And I think when you mix the two, the idea and the execution, things get tricky. Things can get messy. And you can shoot down ideas that would have been awesome. You can, maybe you can't come up with the proper way to execute it on the spot, so you shut it down, and that idea could have been awesome. It could have been an epic game. It could have been an epic mechanic. It could have been an epic art style, whatever it is. And I just think it's a better way to develop. It's a better way to create, separating idea from execution, because it allows your brain to do what it's good at and focus in and hone in and generate the things that you need to generate, like the creativity, like the ideas. And then when you switch modes, when you switch into execution mode, you go, okay, now your brain's in that mode of figuring out how. First you start with the what, then you figure out how. You got to separate them though, because at least in my life personally, it's been such a massive change in the way that I create, because I think I can do everything in bulk now, rather than sit down and make a game, figure out what the game is, figure out and build it all the way through. Like, it gets so messy, it gets so clunky. It's like a brain dump of a game, versus if I have a bunch of ideas and then I pick one, and then I figure out a bunch of ways to execute on it, and then I pick one and I just do it. Like, that's such a cleaner way for my brain to think about things, and I think it's a lot more effective way to get creativity out of your brain and to get ideas and to create more. So that is my message for you today. Separate idea from execution, because it will help your brain work better when you're developing. If you got any comments on this, I'd love to hear from you. I always love to hear from you guys. Leave them below. Once again, I'm Tim Ruswick, and I'll see you guys next time.